Over the past few weeks, gun owners have seen a flood of headlines claiming that major gun laws have suddenly changed because of a single December court decision. Some of those headlines go too far, but the reason they're gaining traction is simple. The legal ground under U.S. gun laws really is shifting, and several court rulings from late 2024 into December are already changing how certain gun laws are enforced. What's important to understand is that there was no single ruling that instantly rewrote gun law nationwide. Instead, multiple federal courts issued decisions that affect different states, different regulations, and different categories of firearms. When you put those rulings together, the impact feels large, especially for gun owners who live in states with aggressive gun control regimes. One of the biggest developments involves so-called assault weapon bans. Federal district courts and appellate courts have continued applying the Supreme Court's Bruen framework, which requires governments to prove that modern gun restrictions are consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. In December, courts again signaled that simply calling a firearm dangerous is not enough. The government must show clear historical analogs from the founding era or early American history. In several cases, judges ruled that states failed to meet that burden. While not all assault weapon bans were struck down outright, enforcement has been blocked or narrowed in specific jurisdictions. That means some bans remain on the books, but states are temporarily prevented from enforcing parts of them while litigation continues. For gun owners, this distinction matters. A law being enjoined can still exist on paper, but it cannot be enforced against residents during that period. Magazine capacity limits were another major focus. Courts reviewed whether limits like 10-round caps have historical roots. In December rulings, judges again noted that magazines are integral components of modern firearms and are commonly owned for lawful purposes. In some states, magazine bans remain under injunctions, allowing gun owners to possess and purchase standard capacity magazines while appeals are pending. Carry laws also saw movement. Courts revisited restrictions on where licensed individuals may carry firearms, often referred to as sensitive places. While the Supreme Court allowed some sensitive place restrictions in principle, lower courts have increasingly rejected overly broad lists that effectively turn entire cities into gun-free zones. December decisions reinforced that states cannot label vast public areas as sensitive without historical support. Another area affected was firearm licensing and permitting. Courts scrutinized lengthy delays, discretionary approval standards, and subjective criteria. Several rulings emphasized that constitutional rights cannot depend on the personal judgment of local officials. While no nationwide licensing system was dismantled, some states were forced to revise how they process applications, particularly when delays become excessive. Red flag laws, officially known as extreme risk protection orders, were also challenged. Courts generally upheld the concept but stressed the need for strict due process protections. December decisions clarified that temporary firearm removal must be accompanied by prompt hearings, clear evidentiary standards, and meaningful opportunities for the accused to respond. Importantly, these rulings do not mean that red flag laws were abolished. Instead, they impose limits on how states implement them. This distinction is often lost in viral headlines, but is crucial for understanding what actually changed. Another misconception is that the Supreme Court directly issued all these rulings. In reality, most December decisions came from federal district courts and circuit courts applying Supreme Court precedent. That means their rulings are binding only within certain jurisdictions unless affirmed by higher courts. However, as more courts rule the same way, the legal momentum grows. Gun manufacturers and retailers were also affected. Courts pushed back against state attempts to hold gun makers liable for crimes committed with their products, citing federal protections and constitutional concerns. While civil liability laws remain contested, enforcement has been limited in some cases. For gun owners, the practical takeaway is this: some restrictions are currently unenforceable depending on where you live, but the situation remains fluid. Appeals are ongoing, and states are actively rewriting laws to survive judicial scrutiny. What is legal today may change again months from now. This is why responsible gun owners are being urged to follow local developments closely rather than relying on national headlines. A ruling in one circuit does not automatically apply nationwide. At the same time, these decisions are shaping the future of Second Amendment law in a way we haven't seen in decades. What's happening now is not a sudden collapse of gun control, but a slow, court-driven realignment. The Bruen decision set the standard, and lower courts are now enforcing it, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes forcefully. December's rulings are part of that process. This legal shift explains why gun law content is surging online. Gun owners sense that something important is happening, even if the headlines exaggerate the details. The truth sits between panic and celebration. Rights are being clarified, limits are being tested, and courts are increasingly demanding that lawmakers justify restrictions with real historical evidence. As we move into the next year, several of these cases are likely to reach higher appellate courts and possibly the Supreme Court. When that happens, the effects could become nationwide. Until then, the landscape remains fragmented but clearly in motion. For now, the most accurate way to describe December's impact is this: multiple gun laws did not suddenly disappear, but many were weakened, paused, or forced back into court. That alone is enough to change how gun laws operate in practice, and it's why this topic continues to resonate with gun owners across the country.